Alright, let's see what we got today. Okay. Looks like we're in for something a little different. Here we go. Well, hey there folks, Chuck here, and welcome to the first official build video of 2024. As a lot of you may have noticed, there's a lot of changes on the channel. Mark and David from Diecast Breakdown are posting a lot more, and that's because we're expanding our partnership on content creation, getting the word out there about Diecast Media Network, growing Diecast Breakdown, and really helping us become a voice for you in the Diecast community. So if you haven't subscribed yet, push that subscribe button real quick while we're talking about it, because our goal is to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2024 and use that audience to raise 24,000 cars for charity using the drivendreams.org charity that Mark has set up. And it's really exciting what he's done there, and we raised like almost 13,000 cars, I believe, last year for kids in need, and it's real easy, and you can find out how you can do it at drivendreams.org. And before I get too much further, a quick shout out to the patrons that make this show and the rest of the shows on the channel go. Thank you all. You're amazing. We'll be looking at you in depth at the end of this episode. But on to the builds, because that's what we're here for. My brother's friend Jacob, who I've done some work for in the past, asked me to do a little more work for him. This is back when I was doing commissions. I'm not doing commissions right now, so thank you for your interest. But I've been sitting on these for almost 2 years, and that's why I am not doing commissions anymore. He asked me to take these 4 diecast vehicles and give them the Flying Valiant Builds treatment. So we're going to start with this one because I like it the best. It's the Ertl F-150 brick nose from a few years back. It's a pretty cool brick nose. And if you like these mid-80s Ford trucks, you know that these were pretty tricky to come by. I think Maisto made one, and now Greenlight is making one, which is really cool. But he's had all of these since he was a kid, and he wanted me to do it up as an old farm truck, weathered but working, and I was going to personalize it for him while I had it apart. The next is this tank from 1974. This is the Shell Shocker, part of the Action Command series, designed by friend of the show, Mr. Larry Wood. He didn't really have too many specific directions for this one, other than that he wanted it weathered and working. Next up, we have a casting from Racing Champions going back to 1990. This is their version of the Days of Thunder Chevy Lumina, although it is not actually a Chevy Lumina. But it's a pretty good base, and he wanted this one detailed and decaled and looking like it just ran the Daytona 500. And finally, we are back in the Ertl camp with this International Harvester tractor. Don't know too much about this casting. I don't really deal much with tractor castings, but he asked that it be treated like a working tractor and given all of the patina and mud and splatter that goes with being a hardworking tractor on a farm. All right, this is going to be an interesting build video, so ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. The Ertl truck came apart easy enough. It had no interior to speak of, and the tank was also pretty easy, just 4 pieces there. In fact, now that I think about it, none of these had a interior to them to speak of. The tractor was interesting because I don't really have the proper tools to do the rivet, so I knew I had to work around it, so I greased the wheels to pull them off because they're a hard rubber. And with a little fluid film and some persuasion from a mini pry bar, I was able to get all but one wheel off. But I can work with one wheel on. The Days of Thunder car and the Ford F-150 both had pretty scratched up windshields, so I got out a little Flitz polish and my buffing wheel, and with the speed on the lowest setting on my Dremel, I was able to coax all of those scratches out and get a more glass-like finish. Especially after I dropped it in Jim Silva's Gauzy Gauzy Gauzy. If you don't have this stuff, Pledge Floor Polish also works very well. I'm a little more pleased with the outcome from the Gauzy, but I can still go back and forth depending on the project. Just make sure you wick away all the little bits so that there's not any large bubbles or raised areas when it dries. And make sure they're covered too, so nothing lands on them while they're drying. Alright, time for a little bit of sponsored content. Hey, look at us getting all fancy. So, a little while ago, and by a little while ago, I mean a few years ago, Super Clean sent me some products in exchange for me reviewing them. and never got around to it. And they said that was fine. But I am going to try and make good on that now. And hey, guess what? I got 3 times the subscribers that I did when they sent this my way. I think they're getting a much better deal than they originally signed up for. Normally, I use oven cleaner or bleach to take chrome off, but I had heard great things about using Super Clean, and it's much less caustic than having bleach or oven spray, oven cleaning spray lying around. It does still have quite a strong odor to it, so make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. I had my garage door open when I did this. And yeah, you just spray it on and give it a few seconds, and it's incredible. The chrome just disappears. So yeah, I'm sold. I've actually got a little jar of this stuff now that I keep on my desk for removing chrome from parts. It's quite impressive and a lot safer than the other alternatives to removing chrome. So thanks, Super Clean. Sorry it took so long to get this out there. Hope it sells a jug or two. Alright, off to airbrushing. Didn't do anything too fancy with the airbrushing, just wanted to make sure everything was primered properly before I dove in. I started with a light base this time, and I wanted to try doing a little pre-shading, especially on the tank since it had a lot of nooks and crannies. I don't think it really shows through that much in the final product, but I'm still working on getting the amount of paint that I put on over the pre-shading to maximize the effect. No paint for the stock car yet because it needed to have a lot of damage done to it. If you've seen the movie Days of Thunder, when that car finishes the Daytona 500, it is just barely rolling. So I wanted to make sure it had every bit of the bangs and bumps that you would get from a lot of rubbing, because rubbing is racing. These little burr tools on Dremels are my favorite way to quickly put dents in a car. I'm sure there are better ways to do it, but as far as quickly removing metal from a casting, it's pretty hard to beat. And if you practice, it can be relatively easy to control, but it does take a few tries and it will walk on you if you're not careful. A great accompanying technique to using the burr tool is to take stiff aluminum tape. This is ducting tape, not to be confused with duct tape. It's very sharp, so watch the edges when you work with it, and it's a great alternative to using bare metal foil. It's a little thicker, and putting it over a bumpy surface, it keeps some of the sharper edges that actual metal has when it's dented. And if you lay it carefully enough and use your X-Acto knife with a very sharp blade to cut along the seams, once you got paint on, it blends right in. Of course, our farm truck is also not going to be immune from dents and dings. I used my own truck as reference to where dents and dings tend to accumulate. And I tried not to go too far on it. It's very easy to overdo weathering on these little cars. But you have to remember, less is more, he said to himself. Alright, back to the paint booth. I figure it's hard to get more Americana than a brick-nosed Ford farm truck, so I wanted to give it a red, white, and blue theme, but keep it pretty subtle. So this red and white truck gets a bed off a blue truck. And there you go. I used my white toner printer to make decals for the International Harvester, and once they were applied, it was time to apply some German black brown for the chipping. This is the part that always makes me nervous, because it feels like that part in The Joy of Painting with Bob Ross where he paints the big pine tree and creates this huge mess on the canvas, and it feels like you can't bring it back. It's just too much. But looking at my reference photos, a lot of these tractors will have almost all of the paint gone from the top of them. And then using a bit of dry brushing, I got some of the edges where paint would be most likely to wear off. And the black brown seemed like a pretty good color for the seat, so I did that while I had it out. If I had the tools for riveting, I would have busted this thing apart and tried to tap it more into place, but I started tapping on it while it was together and I realized that was a very bad idea, so I let that lie. And because I'd only gone over the very center of the wheels with the red paint, all I needed was a little dry brushing to bring out the chip parts on the wheels. The tank was surprisingly tricky because it's so small, and it's not really 1/64 scale, it's considerably less than that. It's very easy to go overboard on the chipping, so I did almost exclusively dry brushing when it came to chipping this thing, just to keep it as light and subtle as possible. I wanted to make sure I didn't erase all the toning work that I did. It's funny seeing the decals under the camera lens and how obvious the film sticks out at this point, but don't worry, it's going to disappear real quick. I wanted to have some accents on the blue part of the truck, so I gave it some white Explorer stripes. The rest of the truck would just be like a standard custom F-150. On the stock car, the black-brown served as a great substitute for road grime. So while I had it out, I got out a stiff brush and did some stippling all along the bottom of the car. The wheels I got are some Real Riders that I got off of a late model NASCAR that I found at the local vintage toy store for $1 in the bargain bin. Keep an eye out for those because they're frequently available for very cheap, and they come frequently with rubber tires. And if you're especially looking for some race rims or some raised white letters, that's a great way to get some. Speaking of getting some, I wanted to make sure that the tire rubbing was accurate on the car. So I took one of the tires off the car, dipped it in the black-brown paint, and dabbed it on the side to simulate where wheels came in contact with the door panel. Once the black brown was dry, I went over it with a chocolate brown color and continued working my way up the spectrum from dark rust to light rust to create that real nice rust texture that really helps these vehicles stand out. I'm not a military weatherer by any means. I have a lot of respect for the people that do that because it's art in and of itself, but doing something on this more stylized version of a tank, I still tried to make sure as much of it as I could reflected some real-world wear. So things like making sure that the tank treads and areas around the sides of the tank where all the paint would be gone were as accurate as possible to some of the reference photos that I found online. A lot of parts on tanks rust quickly, so it was kind of fun to go around and look at every area where rust would accumulate and dab some on and wipe some off and get kind of a sheen of rust over a large part of the tank. Once I'd sealed the truck in ultra matte varnish, I went over the whole thing with a rust wash, and I'm realizing the more I watch other builders, I need to be using a gloss varnish before I do all my washes and panel liners so things flow better, and then do the ultra matte varnish over top of everything. It's against everything in my nature to do that, but I'm going to start trying that in future builds. As it is, it worked okay though. I was able to dab a bunch of it on and wipe it off with a cotton swab. Then it was time for the panel liner. I love this part because it really makes all the details pop. Just be careful when you put it over paint that is oil-based because it will reactivate it if you're not careful. The tank was the best one to put panel liner on because it had all of that grading and texture, and it really came alive once I put the panel liner on it. I used aluminum paint on the truck wheels and on the headlights for their base color. And while I had that out, I drew out the few details that were on the bottom of the Racing Champions vehicle before covering them all in a nice wash of chocolate brown. I used the grease and grime wash to bring out the leaking fluids and filth that accumulates over engines, and the Tamiya weathering powders to bring out the dust and dirt that gets kicked up along the way. I did some very light streaks of chocolate brown on the windshield of the stock car as well to simulate the dirt as it would streak across the top of the windshield and create streaks as it accumulates. It's time to finish up the grille with some amber for the marker lights, a light blue to simulate a faded oval, and some metal medium on top of the aluminum to draw out the headlights. I also used the metal medium as the base for the taillights, where I went over them later with some transparent red. Alright, we're in the home stretch now. Time to get everything back together and do the final details. By the time I was done with all the weathering, the panel liner had kind of blended into the truck, so I went over it again just to make sure everything stood out properly. Once I got the tractor together, it was pretty much done. The tank, I wanted to give it a few more opportunities to pop, so I busted out some amber and red rhinestones and added some lenses to the front and back of the tank. Here's that transparent red for the taillight lenses. And some brass paint for the shells in the tank, and a little more dust and detail for the F-150. Of course, it wouldn't be a farm truck if it didn't have some junk rattling around in it, so I raided my parts bin and added some chain, a box, and made a little mover's blanket for it out of some white glue and a shop towel. I like to go over everything again with the powders once it's together to make sure everything blends together properly. And it's also good because then there's less time for you to handle it and rub the dust off before you seal it all up. A great trick to make your headlights and taillights stand out is once the paint is dry to go over them with some wet effects or a gloss varnish to create a layer of clear on top of them. That really helps simulate that glass look. Finally, I got out some really gritty mud texture paints to go over the vehicles that would be seeing the most off-road action and get them all into the nooks and crannies. And it was basically put a lot in, take a lot off, and what's left, I was quite pleased with the outcome. Put a little blue wash on the shop towel to add some texture to the mover's blanket, and added a dirt filter from Meg where appropriate. And of course a little grime from your leaking fuel fillers, and a final black wash to tie everything together. Then it was time for the decals and the numbers. Alright, let's take one more look at what we started with. Here's the Ertl F-150 before, and here it is turned into a well-worn farm truck. Really happy with how this one turned out. I hope he likes it. And we'll take a look at the Shell Shocker. Pretty well-worn childhood toy. And here it is finished out. You can see where I drilled out the barrel of the howitzer so that looks a little more realistic. I think it's not too shabby for my first real tank outing. And the Days of Thunder Stalker is a very well played with car. And here it is finished up. The decals, by the way, are from Second Chance Redline. And he did a great job of replicating the Days of Thunder livery from the movie. And finally, we've got our Ertl International Tractor, which had so much wear on the decals I almost couldn't make out what they were. It's kind of fun to recreate that. And here's what we ended up with. Again, it's a weird mix of stylized and realistic, given the way the casting is made, but pretty happy with the results. I hope he is too. As I mentioned before, I want to give a shout out to our executive producer level patrons. That would be TWYCE Diecast, Donald Rashik, First and 64th Customs, Video Geek Productions, and of course a special honorary mention to Dane Self as a very generous gifter of memberships. And if you want to know more about memberships and how you can help this crazy project of ours grow, you can visit diecastmedianetwork.com, which will take you to our Patreon page. Or you can hit the little join button down below while you're pressing the like and subscribe and ringing the bells so you don't miss out on what's ahead. Our goal is to put out some form of content every day of 2024 to reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers. So the best thing that you can do for us is subscribe and share these videos with your friends in your Facebook groups and wherever it is that you like to talk about diecast. It really helps grow this channel. So even if you can't support it, you can always share, and that's free and really helps us out. Alright, we got a lot of great stuff ahead, and I gotta go edit another video. So, as always, I want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.